There was these highs where I thought, now I can totally conquer the world. I had the most unbelievable ideas about what I could do. And then there was the complete crash into total depression.
Hey squirrels, welcome to AvyHD, where ADHD isn't some clinical diagnosis, it's just life. I'm Avy, your always honest tour guide through this beautiful mess. Over here, we're not about fixing yourself. We're about figuring out how to actually enjoy your life as you are. So grab a snack and let's go. There's a very specific kind of tired that late identified neurodivergent people carry. It's not the kind of tired of working too many hours, and it's not the tired that a good night's sleep fixes. It's the tired that comes from performing for years, sometimes decades, a version of yourself that was never real, inside systems that were never built for your brain, without a single person telling you why it felt so impossibly hard. And the cruelest part, the better you were at performing, the harder it became to ask for help, because on paper you were fine. High functioning. That's what they called it, as if that was a compliment. And there's a comedian who says, when you say that I'm high functioning, that implies that I function highly, which I object to. Today, I want to ask you something. What if the burnout you're carrying right now didn't start last year? And what if it didn't start 5 years ago? What if it started when you were 4 years old? Hey, squirrels, welcome back to AvyHD. Let's get into it. I am joined today by Kassandra Clemens. Kassandra is the founder and executive director of Heal Your Confidence, a community interest company based in the UK. So for the US listeners, a community interest company means it's legally structured around community benefit and not profit, which tells you everything you need to know about why she built it. She has nearly 2 decades of experience supporting neurodivergent adults, and she has her diagnoses: ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, among others. She did not study this from the outside, she's lived it. And then she built an entire methodology around what it actually takes to recover. Not just cope, not just manage, genuinely recover. Kassandra's work includes holistic profiling, deep dive assessments, burnout restoration program, and a 9-week transformational coaching program. She is also has a stated goal that I have not heard from any other coach in this space. She's trying to make herself redundant as fast as possible, because once you find your own trustworthy inner guidance, you no longer need her. Kassandra, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you have your own late diagnoses: ADHD, dyspraxia, autistic traits, dyslexia. Take me back to that. What was life like before you had language for any of it?
Well, I thought, like so many other people out there, that there must be something really severely wrong with me because life was so chaotic and things weren't working very well. And I had, yeah, as you said, I had no language for that, which makes it very hard.
And when the diagnosis finally did come, what shifted for you?
Well, the first diagnosis I got was in my 40s when I went to university for the first time properly. I had tried in my 20s, but I wasn't well enough. I didn't have the cognitive or emotional resilience really to do that. So when I went back, somebody said, go to these people, they give you a free computer. So I thought that's very strange. That's not at all my thing. But I did go. So and they said I was both dyspraxic and dyslexic. But the dyslexia didn't make much sense or didn't help me very much because yes, I am dyslexic. But that's not really life changing for me. The dyspraxia made a lot more sense because I was always very clumsy and I also felt I had cognitive dyspraxia. So that was good, but it was impossible to get a proper diagnosis for it. It's very, very difficult to find anybody to diagnose you. And then it's very expensive. And then, I worked, as you said, I've got now actually over 20 years of experience working with neurodivergent people. And it took me about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years before I thought, I'm just like them. You know? So at that time, 20 years ago, it was all about dyslexia. And that wasn't really that important to me. I could do the work. I knew how to do it. I continuously learned about it, but it wasn't something that really captured my heart. And then all of a sudden, we got more and more knowledge about attention differences, which people unfortunately call ADHD. And it took me still years before I realized, well, that is what's going on here. Because earlier on, much earlier on, I thought I was bipolar. And I went to a psychiatrist, and at that time, there wasn't even a thought given that maybe adults could have attention differences. It was just bipolar, really. That was the only thing. But thankfully, I think I was very lucky that I came across a young psychiatrist who didn't need to give out medication. He looked at it, what I told him, he listened, and he said, well, I'm very close to bipolar, but not quite. But that was all I got. So I went home and I had to do my own research. How do I deal with the ups and the downs? Because I'm very much combined, totally combined. So there was these highs where I thought, now I can totally conquer the world. I had the most unbelievable ideas about what I could do. And then there was the complete crash into total depression. And I realized that I had to work on the high. And people don't like to hear that because that's very often where we feel, well, finally we are free to conquer the world, right? We are free to write all these books and to create this artwork and to become the CEO or whatever of the company. But I realized, thankfully, very, very quickly that that was where I had to work on. Not take it away, but flatten it out. Not go into the over, but yes, use those times, but also really give myself the stop. And that very, very, very quickly led to that the lows weren't as low anymore. And over time, that just balanced itself out. I have now very little of it, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I know I'm combined. I have got all of these symptoms, but yeah, I don't get that up and down anymore, which is really great. So, and then maybe because I had already done that, it was taking longer for me to realize, why I was working with these students so well and why they reacted so well to me. We were on a heart level, I guess. Yeah. And then, so once I understood that, that made sense of my life, so that was good. But then there was still something really important missing. That was that I still had all these huge problems around social encounters, especially my own family. We were somehow like magnets that would pull themselves apart rather than go together. And it was always, I was so tired and always so drawn, by those meetings, and I've got a big family, and family is very important to me. And then one day I did a course, and half of the course it didn't click, and then I stopped it, did something else, came back to it months later, and my eyes were just like, what? This is describing me. It's describing my relationship with my mother that I could never actually understand. Why did I always only believe what she said? What's a very typical girl-mother relationship when autism is involved. And that actually set me free. To start with, there was a huge grief process, a really big grief process, because if I would have tried to discuss that with my family, it would have been not possible at all. Autism, no, at all. Since then, actually, we know that there's lots of autism in the family, but we still don't talk freely about it.
Yes.
So
My
that,
family is not ready for that either.
no, eventually that totally set me free, because one thing I realized, and that is so interesting, and I haven't heard anybody talk about it, maybe some people do talk about it, but I haven't heard anybody talk about it, is that when you relax and you can look after yourself because you are in yourself, it felt like I was had finally grown to my own skin. And I realized that we all actually tend to stand next to ourselves. We are not in our skin. We are not in our brain. We are. So finally, that had happened. And funnily enough, those 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 polar problems went away. And I realized what happened is, if you are not in yourself, other people get very unsure about what is going on with you. So
Yes.
they are in their lack of clarity, and that creates that. So it's not our fault, it's not their fault as such, but it's a psychological thing. If you meet somebody, you either click and you feel you have that trust to talk and to be, or you are unsure, and then you haven't got that. So that's really interesting. So a lot of that shifted for me and for my family as well.
What you're describing, a very dear friend of mine, Mitchell Levy, that's his definition of credibility, how much people know, trust, and like you. So when you're around someone and there's kind of a disconnect between how they feel and what they're saying, then automatically there's just something that doesn't flow. And you were talking kind of about magnets and opposite magnets with your family and this kind of very strong repelling, but it sounds like there was a positive magnet in your life where you were pulled towards the neurodivergence before you knew that about yourself. So am I understanding correctly that you started this work before your own diagnosis?
Yes. Yeah. Because I think you go where your heart is.
Yeah.
So I find that people who go where their heart is, whether they've know anything about neurodivergence, they tend to be very successful. And the people who go in because they go in with their headspace, they can't be quite as successful because there isn't that open rapport. You work very hard on it, but I have come to understand for myself, not everybody likes that at all, but I've come to understand that it's very much like drug addicts. When you have got somebody who has gone through that process and they are helping other people to get off it, that works like a charm. But people who come in with a much more theoretical background, it's not really possible. Even so, I'm not saying that they're not necessarily successful and do it for many years and also do a lot of good, but there is really a hard quality. You have the pain opens certain ways of feeling, of connecting, I guess. Yeah. Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I find it very difficult to think about them as different to me or to my children or grandchildren or anything like that. But why I managed to grow into my own skin through understanding that I had at least a lot of autistic traits is because I could, for the first time ever, connect back to my early childhood. That's that's what I recognized. That was the child I was. And for me, it was always about true understanding of myself, even as a small child. That was always like the red thread. And that's why I love to work with people who have come to that point as well, who have got the accountability to say, I might get it all wrong. I might make a total mess of this here. But what I'm really seeking is that release from what I'm not to the freedom of who I am. So I love to work in that area, in that arena. So I think we all need to really think about what is it we have to learn about ourselves, and then we understand why we are drawn to certain things and not to others.
You said something in our first conversation that I have not been able to shake, that you said that the first autistic burnout, or for autistic children, the first major burnout can happen between the ages of 4 and 7.
Yeah.
Mostly when we think about burnout now, I think we think about a career problem.
Yeah.
So tell us a
But
little bit more about burnout.
but that is how we came backwards from there, I guess. But it really is the work of Carol Jean Whittington, who has done probably more research in that area than anybody else. She's done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews and thousands of data points. And she's not finished with it yet. She started about 5.5, 6 years ago, and it's still ongoing. And she is the person who really, really knows about burnout like no one else. And so in her research, so she did the research with autistic women and then realized, obviously, over time, it's not a question of gender. It's not a question of one part of neurodivergence, so probably attention differences and autism. That's where you see it most, really. And that's what she found. And it was for her, like for me, a real eye opener because we both had experienced that. By age 5, I was nearly dead. By age 7, I really didn't want to live anymore. I'm not sure whether I ever voiced it because that wasn't really safe in my environment. But she said that she voiced it and she knew children who voiced it. And my granddaughter By the age of 10, she was totally incapable of going to school, doing anything, complete burnout. So, and the reason why is because, or we think why, I was just talking to a coaching client this morning about that, who came with that question, why do I mask? And why can't I be myself? The problem is that children, or it shouldn't be a problem, but small children obviously totally depend on their carers, their caretakers, to help them to regulate their energy. So just in case you don't know that, up to the age of 2, sometimes even a bit older, a child can't regulate like too much energy. That's why they need a hug. They sometimes can't get enough energy. That's why they need the adults, literally the embrace. So it can't be really done in distance. And some people think, that works, but that's why we have hugs. That's why we are carrying our children and so on and so forth. So that makes a huge difference. So if that isn't there, we already have a problem. And of course, we share that with many, many traumatized children around the world. But then very quickly, as we then become more ourselves, the social environment clashes very often more or less strongly with our internal values. And children have got very clear values. They are the center of the earth, so they don't care to start with. So they say it as it is, how they see it. And very often, even as a very small child, I think I remember for me, those clashes started when I was 3 years old. All of a sudden I became aware that I had to choose between my parents depending on what they needed to hear from me. And they wanted to hear very different things. From the age of 2.5 or 3, I was already in between these, in between a rock and a hard place, as they say. So you start with that, and that's very, very hard. It costs a lot of energy. So a lot of children actually get ill. A lot of children find that they can't play in the same way anymore. If they're unlucky and haven't got a really strong peer group, or at least a very good friend who doesn't ask about them being different as they are, they all of a sudden very quickly become very isolated, even as very young children. And then they go to school. Here in the UK, they're going to school at 4, very early. And then they get all of the teachers' criticisms and judgments on top. So the problem is that at that age, you can't even verbalize it. You cannot find words for all of this. Yeah. You need to have your frontal lobes developed in order to actually really make sense for yourself of what is going on. But by that time, which is between the ages of 7 and 9, more toward 9, all of that damage has already happened. So it goes very deep. It really messes you up. It messes your energy up. It puts all these kinks in your emotional brain. Your lower brain is continuously scanning for potential threats because you are so uncertain what's going on around you. So, and all of that is holding so much energy for you. Yeah. So that you can't reason it out properly because there isn't enough energy for that anymore. And I think we really, really have to understand that an awful lot better if we want to help children to have much, much stronger and healthier childhoods, neurodivergent children.
I'm a board member of To Find the ADHD Girls, and the main stated mission is to identify attention differences in all children, but we're starting with girls, before the age of 7, when social masking really kicks in, when the peer influence becomes more important than the home influence, and to allow for intervention as early as possible. Because as you said, like by the time you're 7 or 9 years old, and what you're describing, I never actually thought about my childhood in terms of burnout. But looking back, I can absolutely identify the patterns. My sister and I were going through my wedding album recently. I got married very young. I was 20. And she said, "Oh my God, look at your eyes. They're like so dead." And I said, "Oh, yeah, my eyes were dead until 2022. Track the pictures. Until my diagnosis, separating from my husband, changing my entire life. After my first 2 years of very, very critical burnout, you can see the shift in my pictures, in my eyes.
Yeah, it is something that we can't overlook, And then all the ADHD coaches, I mean, I'm not insisting that anybody calls it attention differences. For me, that's what it is. It's an attention difference. And from a brain perspective, actually, you haven't got a clue what that means because we are starting somewhere in the middle with all of our research, with something we're observing mainly trauma outcomes.
Yeah.
We're not observing how a brain that is different works because long ago we've lost that track already. So yeah, I think if we think that we move into a more enlightened age, there are some very groundbreaking things that we have to change. We can't have our legs in two different camps.
Absolutely. When you were speaking earlier about childhood burnout, I was imagining to myself, okay, you have this neurodivergent child. That means you have a neurodivergent parent, probably. If that neurodivergent parent is one of the primary caregivers of this child, presumably they don't necessarily have the tools to be able to regulate themselves. They haven't necessarily learned enough about themselves to be able to help their child. So that stress or that burnout or that little t trauma must compound over generations.
It probably does. But one of the things that has come out, we run these monthly events on neurodivergent related topics, and it gives space for everybody to speak. But we also have got panelists who are a bit more specialists, so they bring something in. So it's a really great psychologically safe space to share and learn together. And I've learned so much from that really because it's quite popular. People come quite consistently, many, many different people from all over the globe as well. So, and one of the things that we have basically learned together is that very, very often the trauma gets compounded through neurodivergent parents who resist the idea that they are neurodivergent because they come from a background where that is just not okay at all. It's bad enough to be weird. It's bad enough to not fit in. It's bad enough to get continuously criticized, but you are not putting your hand up that you are not different, but actually completely not right. Yeah, because that's what it comes down to people who are not educated. So what we have now found more and more, I hear that more often, which is really lovely, is that adult children have the guts to talk to their parents about it. More and more I hear that that is very successful. So I just heard, it's obviously not all the time at all. So don't go and confront your parents. It might not go down well. But I've just heard somebody say, my 77-year-old mother just got an ADHD diagnosis and is over the moon. Yeah. And I've heard somebody from Australia who comes from Asia, he's gone back, talked to his parents, they both got it. Somebody else who has Chinese relations, they are now a wonderful, harmonious family after nothing but struggles because the parents would always just say, our daughter is weird. And now they are saying, I guess I'm a bit weird as well. Maybe it's okay to be weird. And
Yeah.
so I think we have to be sometimes a bit trusting. It's not too late. And sometimes it doesn't work. I can't imagine having that conversation with my parents because they live in an altered reality. So there is a lot going on for them. Very, very traumatized people. But I think perhaps let's say in 50 years' time, maybe that's not a conversation that is so very special, in terms of that it happens. It might happen a lot more because people just do it. And also because, of course, it will that then be a generation of parents for whom all of this is not so new and so threatening. Yeah. So yes, I think it will move on. And come to a good conclusion eventually.
I was diagnosed what I consider late at 30. You were diagnosed later at 40. Late identified neurodivergent professionals, those high functioning ones that we were talking about at the beginning, that they carry a very specific type of exhaustion. If you're talking about these burnouts beginning from childhood and people are getting diagnosed maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, where does that leave them normally from where you sit?
It leaves them with a lot of questions when they hit menopause. Because at the very latest, the lady this morning, I would say she's probably in her 30s, she hit a really big stumbling block when she had a big personal trauma happening. After that, it got a lot worse. Before, she said it was always there. She always had to mask for adults from a very, very tiny, tiny child. But it only really became bad with peers, with people she really liked after she had that trauma. A lot of perimenopausal women will say everything changes. So I've done all the right things up to this point. A friend of mine calls it delayed support needs. There will come a time when either your work situation or your private situation, your body situation, whatever it might be, actually really rattle that cage and say, okay, this is happening now. Have you got the resources? No, you haven't. So now look at it. And I think that is why we've got this tsunami, like somebody called it, of women in their 30s to 50s, sometimes even 60s, now demanding to get an assessment. Yeah, so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be challenged, but it's also a very painful thing because, yes, we haven't got those resources. But it's always think it's an amazing place to look for freedom when you come into those places. I had two really, really big burnouts. The first one, I didn't know much about myself yet. The children were still small. And I have got this mindset. I just said to myself, okay, I can't walk. I can't get up. In a year's time, I'm working again. And that's it. You know. And then the second time around, it was a big, big trauma that happened. Or to me, it was a very big trauma. And it took me 9 months before I could go back to work, another 3 months before I could actually get my head around work again, and 3 years in all before I could walk properly again. But every time that kind of thing has happened to me in my life, I also knew I had to take this to bring things forward. What's actually going on here? How is that related to how I think, to how I am? And that has always been saving grace. And really, I would come out of these things really quite a different person.
Through the fire.
Well,
I want to say just one thing about the high functioning label, because what that actually means is, as Cassandra's saying, you were good at hiding, you were good at performing, you were good at masking, and the system rewarded you for the performance, which makes it harder to ask for help because on paper you're fine. The ADHD tax, it's not just time and money, it's the more damaging piece is really that ongoing belief that there's something genuinely wrong with you. It's hard to get rid of.
it's very hard to get rid of because it's particularly hard to get rid of if that becomes something that we make our pet, our emotional pet. Yeah. So where we then feel we can ask something of the world because we haven't been given what we needed, or when it goes into that learned helplessness, that is when it becomes very difficult. And I think it probably needs very specialist therapists to work with that because it's very deep, very difficult. It's much, much easier, even so there might be a lot of pain. But we are brave people. We've lived all our lives. People call it resilience, but it's not a good resilience. It's a survival mode. We are very good at survival mode. Real resilience is a healthy resilience where body, mind, and soul work together. So we all need help to get to that kind of resilience. But if we have got the guts to say, okay, this is really bad, what do I need to do? What we have found, what really helps is community. Because most of us have been isolated all our lives because we just felt nobody else can be that weird, in the wrong sense, weird. And what you really need, I think, is that community that doesn't tell you you are wonderful, but the community that tells you, yeah, know exactly what you're talking about. all good. And that is so helpful because you realize you are actually a full member of society. Because really, if we are looking back, it's the neurodivergent people who keep this world going because the sheep, so to speak, run it into the earth every single time. So we need the scouts. We need what some people call the hunter-gatherers. We need the people who can see beyond that and can get us out of those situations, The people who haven't got these wonderful brains, they would stay on their land until they drown or until they haven't got anything to eat anymore, they until nothing is yielding anymore. I mean, that's what it is, because they just haven't got that extra bit of foresight or farsight and the creativity to help this, and that's why we have got in my book, that's why evolutionary in an evolution manner, we have got so many divergent people now because we have managed to get this planet onto the brink of existence and ourselves too. So we need an awful lot of creative thinking and people who can really, really think outside the box to solve these problems. We can't mentally break. We can't change overnight. That's not usually happening at all. We need help, or we need a period where we really have to question everything, where our bodies say we don't work anymore, or when nothing around us any helps us to stay as we always have been, you know. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be, but it gets an awful lot easier when we are not on our own being there. And that's very often people you wouldn't have expected, you know. People that you maybe have always even looked down upon, because you were the one who got it and they were the one who didn't get it, apparently, or you were the successful one, they were the unsuccessful ones. And all of a sudden they become your best friends because they are just saying, keep going. You're okay. Nothing wrong with you. Yeah. But there was a lot wrong, but not with you as a person. Coming back to the brain, we haven't even started to understand neurodivergence at all.
It's much easier for the system to have easily programmable people than to have to interact with people who are difficult to program.
Yeah. So we have to live with that. The outside world is very, very hard on them. But who knows what that does to their brains eventually when they're adults? Maybe they do things and they might have resilience that we don't even know about. Yeah. Positive resilience. They might have ways of dealing, of interacting with this very broken world in a way that you couldn't even dream about. Yeah. So from that point of view, to every mother out there, to every grandmother out there, hang on. And trust that eventually it will be okay. I mean, I have difficulties because obviously, all parents are different. And sometimes you wonder, whether the child is actually brought up in a way that would give them not just that feeling that they were worth given everything to them, but that a lot of other things, good things are happening, So we live in those times where it's sometimes very difficult whether a child to know whether it will be a positive or negative thing, especially when we are brought up very different, with a moral code perhaps that's not shared with the newer generation. They've got different ideas about what to do with children.
That's such a beautiful place to pause with that message to parents.
Well, I mean, also
It's
fathers,
trained on.
not just mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts and uncles, because one person who gives that child an idea that they are okay will just change everything. I had a teacher when must have been about 10, the only one ever, who looked at me and I was at my worst. I was, I was the classroom terror, really. Looking back, I don't know how she managed to see anything good in me, but she knew what I needed. She knew that what I needed was a really good and challenging education to get me out of all of of those problems. Unfortunately, nobody listened to her. But without that woman, I might have long been dead. Just knowing that there was somebody who stood up for you and believed you. And funnily enough, she was called Mrs. Little. And she was so tiny that even in the highest heels, she only was about as tall as we were. So it's easy to remember her, Mrs. Little, who stuck up for me. Yeah, so it makes a huge difference.
Be a fierce defender of the person whose potential you witness, especially if that person is a child, even if that person is an adult. Because if that adult's child never met someone who told them that they were okay, maybe you're the first person to tell them that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think all of us can do so much good. So much good, as long as we absolutely refuse to do something that hurts. Yeah. And allow that person to be and really listen to them. We can do so much good. Because that's what helped us, right? It helped us that somebody listened to us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. This is exactly the kind of conversation I started this podcast to have. Second. Before I let you go, where can people find you and find out more about Heal Your Confidence?
I think if you look up Heal Your Confidence Community Interest Company, there is none other than us. It will come up. Even so, we haven't got a very wide internet appearance yet, but you will find that. But if you address any email to hello@healyourconfidence.com, then it will definitely reach us.
Thank you so much. Squirrels, I want to stay with this last thing that Cassandra just said. The real work is not to manage better. It's to find the voice that was yours before the performance started, before the masking started, to stop asking why you can't keep up and to start asking who you are, what you need. You're not weak for needing support that you should have had decades ago. And you're not behind. You are exactly where somebody who has been carrying this much for this long without the right help would be. You are not broken. The system is. Let's build a better one. Bye, squirrels. See you next time.